Okay, so today we're going to be going through and cutting the base for the picture frame project. So the things that we'll need here to complete this, obviously a piece of lumber. We have a square, quick saw, back cut saw, doesn't matter as long as you have a saw, a ruler, and a couple of files. This is how we're going to start. So the first step that we're going to do is we are going to measure off the piece that we're going to be cutting for the base. So I'm going to call it 8 inches. So if I hold my ruler to the edge, I'm going to mark 8 inches. And I'm going to use the square to help me to create a nice 90-degree perpendicular line. Pushing the square up against the side of the wood, following my mark, tracing my line. From here, I'm going to take my piece of lumber, set it in the bench vise, making sure that my line isn't inside where I might cut the bench at some point here, so my line is actually going to be outside so that I have freedom of motion here. I prefer to do this with a quick saw, but you could also use a back cut saw. Technique is the same. The difference between these two saws is that a back cut saw has a metal rib that makes this saw not as flexible as a quick saw is. But again, it's up to you. So the first thing that you're going to do is on your mark, you're going to put the heel of the saw up against your mark, and I'm going to make 3 consecutive backstrokes towards myself. Now, it's important that I keep the saw lined up with my shoulder during the cut. That's going to make sure that I have a nice, even, straight cut on my line. If I don't line my shoulder up, the saw blade is going to turn and my cut is going to walk in one direction or the other. So again, the first thing that I'm going to do is when I line up with my mark, I'm going to pull the saw back towards me 3 times. It's 2, 3. What that does for me is it cuts a small divot that I can now put my saw into and begin to cut. Now the motion of the saw is that I'm cutting on the downstroke, lifting the saw out, coming back, and then cutting again on the downstroke, lifting myself out and cutting down on the downstroke. That is how I'm using the saw now. When I start moving quickly and cutting, you can't really see that. If at some point you want to, I'm going to now. I'm going to turn my wood. I'll use the back cut saw on this side just to demonstrate. Again, line up with my line. Pull the saw towards me. 3 times. And again. I'm pushing down, picking up. Pushing down, picking up, pushing down. Now you can see it's a relatively good cut. However, I do still have some material here that's a little bit high that needs to be taken down and smooth. For that, I'm going to start to work with my files and my rasp to try and take some material out. There are different shapes of the rasp. There's definitely different levels of coarseness to them. This is a coarse file, this is a medium, and this one I would consider to be smooth. So if I want to take this down and make it flat, I'm going to use the coarse file first. There are 2 sides. There is a flat side and then there is a beveled side to this. So if I want to make a flat cut, I'm going to use the flat side, not the beveled side. Okay, so I usually use two hands. I put one hand on the back side, one hand on the front. And I'm essentially doing the same thing that I was doing with the saw. I'm pushing in this direction, carrying the bevel back up, or the file back up, and then pushing again, and then bringing it back up and pushing it up. And again, this really is for taking out a lot of material, and you can see how much material just based on the sawdust that's coming off the back of this. You will typically get what's known as chip out on the back side of this, where the file is actually hitting the back side of the wood grain, and it gives you chips of wood. So typically speaking, you would have to choose which side is going to be your finished side. So your finished side would be on the side closest to you. Your unfinished side, or your bottom of your picture frame, would be out to the table. So your chip out is on the side that not necessarily going to see. Once we get the shape that we want, we go from a coarse file to a medium file. It's getting a little bit smoother. Now I'm going to transition to a smooth file. Nice and noisy. And then typically what you see is you'll see the wood grain become more pronounced as you get it closer to a smooth. But this is the correct technique for cutting the base piece of your picture frame.